Hey everyone, welcome back to episode number 10. I put up 5, you put up 5. Ready? 10. Awesome. Whoa. Oh my God. Alien hands. Failed. There you go. 10 fail. Welcome to the 10th episode of Dude Guy. We are celebrating by not recording a podcast for weeks. Matt went and toured the world on 2 wheels, and I actually went to a race, oh my God, and did a bunch of other stuff. So we're here to catch you up on all things. We've got some current events, some old school topics, maybe a tech tip or two, but I'm excited for DudeGuy. But first, Matt, welcome back.
Thanks. It's good to be back. Everything's in my own language now, which is great. I don't have to guess when I go to the grocery store what I'm buying.
Also, you didn't have to say dude guy in French or whatever other language you were. How many stamps did you get in your passport while you were away?
Oh man, unfortunately, you don't get we only got like one. I guess I only got one because you don't get any stamps when they just let you drive across the border when you drive across the border from one. Was it Schengen region? You can just drive from Italy to France, and they don't give you a passport stamp when you just drive across the border. So I only got one when I went into Italy.
Okay.
More stamps.
You should have just asked for more stamps. Don't you want to pat me down? I'm Dude Guy. Or maybe they knew you were Dude Guy and they didn't want to mess with you. Congratulations on your stage race. It was super fun to follow and see how it went. Although it does sound like from your feedback that there's a lot of racing stuff going on. Not so much of the tourist side. You lamented not being able to see more of the village. Did you expect you'd be like walking around taste testing baguettes or something? What was the expectation you had that didn't come true for that
I did. So for folks that don't follow me religiously on Strava, as I did a 7-day mountain bike stage race in basically in the Alps. So you use point to point in the Alps. Super fun, right? It's like it was on my bucket list of things to do. And how I envisioned it would be like I'd get up in the morning, ride my bike, I'd finish riding my bike, I'd feel awesome. And then I would walk around town and find something to eat and explore the town and just do it again the next day. Yeah, that's how it's supposed to go. But no, it didn't go like that. I rode my bike and then was immediately trying to find something to eat and drink and then wash my stuff and then try to find where our hotel was and then navigate a new town and then go to sleep and then do it the next day. So all the towns were a little bit of a blur, but my wife took good notes. So good reason to go back.
I see.
Yeah. Okay. The admin and logistics of stage racing is no joke. I could see why like those guys that do it for the Tour de France and move every day, living out of your suitcase, having your stuff packed, having enough kit, There's some logistics to that but yeah, I'm not complaining. I'm not a guy complaining about riding my bike in the Alps, but it definitely had more logistics and admin than I anticipated.
Yeah, totally. I think racing in Europe in general sort of has that nuance to it. It's kind of going to a new supermarket. You're like, I've been in a bike race before. And then you walk in and you're like, where's the produce? Like, why is it over there? It's supposed to be over there. What do you mean the dairy's here? And it's all there. It's just differently organized. And it's just different enough that it makes everything 10 times slower. I hear you. Anyway, it sounds like it was amazing. That's all. It's great. You got a thing off the bucket list. You're only 27 years old. It's incredible. How big could your bucket honestly be?
I wish I was only 27 years old, but I plan my training like I'm 27 years old, which is
so guilty. All right. Okay. Nobody wants to talk just about us. So let's talk some Dude Guy stuff. So you called this out in the Geneva, in our community for the team, about the aerodynamic benefits of stuffing a water bottle down the front of your jersey when riding in a TT position. I'm calling it the stuffed turkey. You heard it here first. Everyone's just a bunch of stuffed turkeys running around. And I say that because there's a wide variety of bottle stuffing techniques out there. But before we dive into making fun of people, as we do here on Dude Guy, especially ourselves, tell us a little bit more about these benefits and why would I want to bring an extra bottle to stick down the front of my shirt when I'm riding on my TT bike?
Yeah, so I guess it was first seen in the pro race. They had some pictures of some of the pros, and they're obviously in the aero position. And then like their chest is oddly, the jersey is oddly sagging down. And more, I guess, as word got out of what is that athlete actually doing, I guess it filtered down to the age groupers. And essentially what they're doing is taking a large water bottle, not the small 500 milliliter one, but the one that I think just like the one that you were just drinking out of, a taller one, like the big, like 26, maybe not that massive, but like the larger water bottle.
Guys, I don't know about this. And I'm ready to race.
Yeah. So they put it basically down the jersey. So when you're in the aero and it makes your chest larger. And then a company out of an aero testing company out of California did a a variety of tests with their athletes and tried different sized bottles, try to figure and different sized humans, and tried to optimize human to bottle and there is an advantage to having that bottle like in your jersey, but there are some disadvantages to that, having that bottle in there too. So we can talk about some of that. But yeah, it was fascinating of putting this bottle down your jersey. But it just takes up that space that would typically be in between your chest and your knees, right?
It basically redirects the air. Exactly. You can imagine if that shape of a human moving forward is like a catch, like something that's going to catch the air, that if you fill that space by placing stuff in the jersey, it redirects the wind around that pocket, if you will, on the human. And we spent a lot of time doing it on the front of the bike, bottles, shaping, hydration systems, praying mantis arms, etc. But it turns out that even with that, there's still the airflow still comes into that area, and to block it, there's benefits both from the front end and perhaps even a little bit from the side as well in terms of the shape. So super interesting.
You've made some comments, I think, before about like how this year everybody's doing arms up at Kona, then everybody's arms down, and then arms up, and then like between the bottle, like everybody's got massive water bottles, and then there's fairings, and I think like Canyon at one time had a big water bottle thing that came part of the one big integrated unit in the front of their. So everybody was trying to, like you said, make the front of the bike very air. So this is super cheap. You drop the water bottle in there. And then folks were talking about dropping the water bottle in there with potentially as ice, and then it cools your chest and stuff like that, you want to talk some more about that?
I do. Yeah. Just real briefly. So I went to Lake Placid because I saw your post, and then I was at Lake Placid for the Ironman. And I was curious because triathletes are super early adopters. And sure enough, I would say 1 out of every 30 or 40 athletes was doing something like that. I even saw one guy who had a smaller bottle, like maybe one of the 500 milliliter ones that he just carried with him. And he got to the bike mountain line, and you could see he had forgotten what he was supposed to do with it because he was holding it in his hand. He's at the line because his bike has bottles on it. So he didn't have a place to put the bottle. He had it in his hand. And he was like, oh, yeah, this goes down the front of my shirt. But I did see a variety of people. Some of them, because of running, the bottle had gone really low. Others had bottles very high. But in general, people had read the memo about, hey, these bottles make a difference. Thinking more about it myself, and I wrote an article, I put it up on our blog at endurancenation.us/blog. If you go to our website, I think you really need to be mindful about the full bottle and the methodology for that bottle. This really isn't going to be a bottle that's easy to access. The whole point of being aero is that you're staying aero, right? So if you're constantly sitting up to get this bottle out, to open it and drink it, it's like you've reduced the value of the aero. So it would have to be some kind of a straw-based system if you were going to drink out of it. I could see the ice piece is cooling you down, but I don't know how effective ice is at cooling you when it's on the front of your chest in the aero position relative to being on your back, which is more exposed to the sun. Like ice on the chest when you're running and you're upright and that's more exposed, perhaps. I'm not sure about the front side, but I am fascinated by the simplicity of the concept. Anybody can go grab a bottle and put it down in front of their kit. The key is your kit has to be able to support the bottle. So if you're a fan of super baggy bike jerseys, it's going out the bottom, like into your wheels, not a good idea. So you do need like kind of a skin tight suit or some version thereof.
Yeah, sure. And even the neck scoop, I think, is the next part. Even if it's not going to drop down and drop out, if it's super baggy, but if you have a large or low neck, then you put that bottle in there. You basically have just made a huge wind scoop of your neck. Your neckline, because you default. So they show that in some of the testing that some folks had a looser fitting jersey or a very low neckline. You put the bottle in there, you just drop that neckline, and all it does is just scoop air.
Super scooper.
So I think it has a combination of, if you're going to employ that technique, you have to make sure that you have the right clothing to make it happen.
100%,
there is the additional cost of carrying that weight of that bottle around. You're carrying how many ounces/pounds of water, but there was an aero advantage, a power advantage to it. So
yeah, they said 9% aerodynamic sort of gains, which is a pretty significant for a bottle in your jersey. Like all the things that we spend money on, like you already have bottles and you have a jersey. That said, I do want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, which is for sure, if you're racing, not everyone on a sliding scale of desired time and income can go buy race jerseys, but absolutely wearing well-fitting kit is I think is also a huge low piece of hanging fruit for people. I was amazed again to see people wearing all sorts of different equipment and material in Lake Placid. Not that everyone has to be racy, but there's also some level of comfort to it as well. Like these are highly functional pieces of gear. It makes a difference. And I actually want to say, I saw a bunch of people on road bikes, which is fascinating to me. I probably saw like fit people, like maybe 100, 150 people just on road bikes. Now I get it. Not everyone has a tri bike, but I was like, wow, it's just a lot of just people like going out for it's a fondo. So super interesting to me. All right. I think it's worth it. You should test it out. We've got some instructions on endurancestation.us/blog. We've got some tips for you. You can practice it. We do recommend practicing indoors on your trainer with your kit on to make sure you get the bottle right and the fit right and things work for you before you go out in the open road and start sticking a bunch of random stuff in your shirt. End up in an ambulance on the way home with your ribs protected because you had gigantic bottles down the front of your shirt, but a big story to tell when you get back home again. We don't want that. All right. So next up, what do we have for next up?
Next up, we were going to talk about either the Tour de France commentators. We could talk about, Andrew Messick did another interview with Jack Kelly. We talked about that early on when it was a pretty contentious interview, and now Messick's retiring. He did another interview, a follow-up interview with him, and your own racing, because last time you spent a lot of time talking about your race prep and then your mountain bike race. There you go.
Let's do announcers, Ironman racing. Let's do that. Okay, so announcers. Right. So I made full disclosure when the pandemic hit. I remember I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be training in my basement this whole time. Because you remember there was a time when we realized, I'm not sure if it's correctly or not, that if we rode in a pace line, if the first person to sneeze, then every other person would have COVID because of the wind. So we were like, we can't possibly ride bikes together. Everybody must be slower. Do you remember those days? I remember running and seeing someone and they'd be on the other side of the road and I put my buff up and I'd also hold my breath for a minute as I ran past them.
You're giving me PTSD.
Oh my God, so crazy. Anyway, now we're back to regular life where people do all sorts of stuff that's just gross and disgusting all the time, and we have no problem with it. Anyway, so back then I was like, I need to invest in something different if I'm going to be riding my bike indoors all the time. And I decided, because GCN had this like subscription deal, that I got it. And there's some ridiculous price for GCN. I love watching bike racing when I'm on my bike indoors. It makes the time go by super fast. And the announcers with their accents, the way they actually say Belgian and Italian and Swiss and Norse and Flemish, Belgian names all properly is incredible. And I just love a good name. And GCN announcers just crush it. So I've been spoiled for the longest time. And then the Tour de France came around. Everybody's, I'm watching the Tour de France. And they were talking about Phil Liggett and Bob Roll. And I was like, that's going back to olden times and trying to watch old school announcing. But it sounds to me like you didn't take my word for it. You did some sampling. You went out there and sampled the announcers. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I did take your word for it. I was all in. So I bought GCN. I'm like, oh, Patrick says these are the guys to go with. And I'll trust Scott. These guys are like, go with GCN. They know what they're talking about. So I did. I GCN'd for a little while. And man, I was not a fan. I couldn't do the GCN stuff. I didn't think they were like any more. They were a little bit more insightful, and they weren't as constantly looking for the iconic phrase like Phil Liggett is. He's always looking for, it seems like he's always trying to find a great way to say, anyway, he's all over his machine. He's just looking for the next great quote. He's got encyclopedic knowledge of cycling, but he uses to talk about that all the time, and sometimes not about what's happening on the road. Like, I don't want to know what happened 20 years ago at this same stage when they rode it 4 other times and who the winner was in 1937. The guy's attacking right now. Please talk about that.
Please talk about that.
So then I bailed on that. I'm like, all right, fine. I just didn't, and I'll go back to paid for another subscription. So I went back over to NBC, tried to watch some Phil Liggett, and there's just too much going on the screen. There's Phil, he's going nuts. There's a scroll at the top. There's a scroll at the bottom. They're trying to tell me how fast the riders are. It's just, it's like watching the stock market in real time. I just couldn't, this is not relaxing for me. I can't take an hour of this. So also on NBC, they have the world feed, which is also the same. It's all the same video across all the feeds I'm talking about. There's only one, video feed. And then everybody just talks about it differently. So to that point, even the Italian, when I watched it live in Italy, there's an Italian guy talking about it. I had no idea what he was saying. I'm watching the same feed on NBC. So there's only one camera feed, and then everybody has to talk about that. Anyway, there's a set of commentators on the world feed, and the only thing they talk about is the racing. And the only thing in the upper left-hand corner is the peloton, the gap to the leaders, and the gap to other groups. There's no other fancy graphics. There's nothing else going on. And they talk about, imagine this, the race.
Oh my God.
It's great. Yeah. So It was Nicholas Roach is the color guy, and he's got the good. They both have the good accents, and like he does the inside perspective from the racer's perspective. Yeah. So I am a NBC World Feed guy, and then only watch the highlights of Phil Liggett just for the entertainment purposes. But I can't take more than 20 minutes of it. I can't take more than 20 minutes of it. It's just too much.
I want to speak on behalf of the DudeGuy audience. We're so grateful that you are sampling all the announcers so we can just not have to sample that and put our time and energy elsewhere. I agree with you. Like, I want more information about the tour, but I want it to be information that makes sense to me, that sort of enriches my experience. Like ticker feeds, like nobody chooses a ticker feed for any information about anything. I wish there was a ticker of that information that like just blurb stuff somewhere else. Like the design of a ticker itself is ridiculous. So anyway, yeah, I hear you. I'm all about the racing. I would love to see in the future an opportunity where perhaps even each team, like you could follow Jumbo Visma or you could follow someone else and be like, hey, I have the team channel, or rather almost like a team overlay. So if it's the same feed, I just pay X, I get the Jumbo Vision thing that goes over my screen, and I can see where the Jumbo Visma riders are and their peloton and like kind of their data and how their team stats are doing or whatever. Or when somebody comes up on the screen, maybe I can click on the thing and get like a little profile card for this person and see what's happening or stuff like that. Like I could see something really interesting for individual elements of a place where I want to dive more deeply. And to your point, I think announcing, and the reason why I think people are annoyed with the Phil Liggett's is that, to your point, there's so much more information that we can get out of what we're seeing on the screen that we don't need to add a bunch of just like words to what we're seeing. I want you to expand what I'm seeing. I don't need someone yelling at me about what I'm seeing. And that whole idea of the encyclopedic thing, I know exactly what you mean. It's hard to tell. You walk in and they're like, the celery is under the lettuce. And you're like, I don't know what that means. Like, what just happened? Is somebody winning? Is someone who? There's not all the things you're missing. A journalism teacher would say, Phil, go to the back of the class. There's no who, there's no what, there's no why. It's just words assembled with this really big, deep voice. Yeah. No, unfortunately, he's become a bit of a caricature of himself, but as it were. Okay, awesome. So that's the Tour de France off. Let's move over to Ironman. So I went to Ironman Lake Placid last weekend. It was not a planned race weekend for me. In the past, Endurance Nation has gone to races when we have large contingents of people. We used to have 40 people at Lake Placid, and now we had 40 people, and they are racing at 10 different events all across the country and the world. So it's hard to find those people because they're everywhere. But shout out to everyone who raced last week because it's pretty fun to watch. But in Lake Placid in particular, we had a handful of athletes who are racing, so super fun. But it was interesting. I've raced Lake Placid, say 2014, 2015. There were 2,500. It was max capacity athletes, just chock-a-block people, everything. Completely different experience this time. 1,600 athletes, so almost 1,000 less participants. As I mentioned, there were a significant percentage of those athletes were clearly not that into it. Like they didn't have all the gear, right? They just had a bike. They like had a shirt, like a race top and a bike, but like they weren't all aero or whatever. And it was just super low key. It was actually really enjoyable as a spectator and being in town with the family because there was 1,000 less racers, which means, I guess if everyone brings 2 or 3 people, I was like up to between 3,000 and 5,000 less people in the town, which just made life just a lot easier for us. But it was interesting to read. I was over on Slow Twitch earlier today just to see, and a lot of the slots in the 50 plus age group on the women's side in particular rolled really deeply. People just not that interested in traveling, definitely not that interested to Nice, but overall not so interested in the whole sign up for another thing and do the whole other thing, which is interesting to me. So my gut reaction to it is, because we were talking about Messick last time, while they've grown the brand, particularly in Europe, particularly with 70.3, I would say overall the Ironman space is not growing at all. And definitely if Ironman is going to remain successful, they're going to have to figure something out. Because if you're down, this is similar to other races that we've heard about in the past as well, that are down between 500 or 1,000 athletes per race. 1,000 people at $1,000 at 10 different races is a big hit to your guaranteed revenue across a year. It would be interesting to see how things evolve. But that's not what you're here to talk about. You wanted to talk about interview 2.0. Messick came back.
Yeah, Messick came back. Yeah. So just a quick recap. If you've just recently joined us and we were talking about
what?
Andrew Messick. The first interview he had with Jack Kelly, who does that triathlon show, and he also does How We Train, where he just talks to athletes and he tries to really ask pointed questions about what do you specifically do each week when you go for your workouts. Tell me what that workout is, just because he's fascinated with what these professionals do on a daily basis. And he does drive a pretty good interview and won't let folks get off the hook with just I work out hard. Yes, he'll get a detailed answer. So his first interview with Messick was, I would say, politely contentious. It was a little adversarial. I think Messick, I think underestimated him, and he was eating dinner or an apple, I guess, during the interview. And then he wouldn't, Jack, the interviewer, would not let some issues go and kept reattacking. And I think it irritated Messick. So now we've fast forwarded a little bit, and now Messick's going to retire because he's done 12 years at the CEO space. He's going to stick around until they pick a new CEO, and he's going to be on the board. Okay. And it's been quite, from his perspective, just from Messick's perspective, when he listed the big events for 2022, he listed certainly the split for Kona for men, women to Nice. He mentioned the race in Hamburg where the motorcycle, the athlete and the motorcyclist, and the athlete was really injured, and the motorcycle driver died from the collision. And then he also mentioned the interview was also pivotal in his year. That interview that he did was went super poorly for him from a PR perspective. So when he asked him hey, what were the pivotal events for 2022? He listed those three things in the interview, and the interview was one of them. Yeah. This interview was a lot less contentious. It was I wouldn't say they were hugging and making up, but I think he handled the interview much better, and it would have been nice for him to say some of those things when he was actually active CEO. It seems now that he's decided that he's going to leave, he's found the words to somehow at least relate to what I would consider myself a triathlete, but the answers he was giving before, I did not relate to. But
can you give us an example? What's an example?
That was an example. He definitely, the interviewer Jack Kelly was pressing him on the decision to 2 days in Kona, right? So 2 days of why'd we split the race up, and then why can't you do it in Kona, and then why are you doing it in Nice, and is that a good decision? And really, you just did it. Just tell me you really did it for the money. And I think he was honest about that, is that he did say, yes, we did. There is a financial aspect to that, but I think he gave a couple of really good arguments about how Ironman has done a pretty decent job, has done a good job of elevating women in sport and giving women their own day. And he made some good points about back in 1980, if you go back to Julie Moss era or whatever, it was interesting to me was that Ironman was one of the first events that a woman could do that was endurance related, besides the Boston Marathon, because there was a stigma against women in longer endurance sports and stuff like that. And anyway, I thought he had some good points relative to expanding the brand. Anyway, but he did admit it is also good for the bottom line, but that's not necessarily their sole driver too. There's some dynamics about the women's race when you have a bunch of women racing with the men, motorcycles, drafting, all that kind of stuff like that. Just having a fair race for the women as well as for the men. And I think there is some truth to that, as well as them just opening it up so they could have two venues with twice as many people or whatever.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to come at you, bro. Put those gloves up. So number one, I'm all about the Ironman was one of the first places. My pushback on that is fast forward to today. It's been 40 years since Ironman was a great place for women to race and be competitive. And there's 39 of those years where Ironman collectively sucked at it. So it's great to be we were one of the first places. Yeah, but you weren't actually carrying that ball. You just looked over and found it and picked it up again. And you're here's our ball. Yeah, not the same as championing these women and women in sport, which I think is part of what makes this change to the men and women feel inauthentic. And to me, the real driver was the way that the pandemic played out. In other words, when Ironman realized early in the pandemic that people from Europe could not travel, they had a race in Hawaii that needed to happen, but they knew that they weren't going to get the majority of people who come from Europe and abroad to Hawaii to race. So they had to fill that race. And they went out to the legacy people. They let in a crap ton of legacy people who had already qualified but were waiting, or people who hadn't even qualified yet. They were only 8 races in, and they're we know you'll get it. come join us. So all of those people took that spot. They had the people who could go, and all these new people they added on top, and they couldn't have the race. So now you've got a race that's been deferred. Then the next year comes along, and they're like, hey, we got to have this race. What are we going to do? They're trying to figure out what to do. So some racing was happening. So they were like, what do we do? They tried to do it again. And I'm super bad at time, as anyone in my life will tell you. So I can't remember if that was like another version of what just had happened in the first example, or if they also had been like, oh, you know what? St. George is a world championship. So if you're doing St. George, that counts as your world championship. Go there. Like they were already trying to take people and stick them into an event that they knew could happen, was in the United States. It could solve for a bunch of people who were here. Because if you recall, and if you're an Ironman athlete who had paid money, you do recall this, Ironman was like the only event on the planet that was not refunding you your money. They were like, we've got the money, we're not giving it back, because they needed it. And so people were left holding a bag, being like, I don't want to go to this race. I don't want to do that. So don't worry about it, we'll do it in Hawaii. Hawaii didn't happen again. And they tried to fill the race. So now they've got 2 years worth of Hawaiis that didn't happen. So when Hawaii finally is coming around again, it looks like we're going to race. Ironman is stuck. They're holding bags of money, which is people's money, which they don't want to give back. And they also have 2 days worth of athletes who need to race, many of whom did not take this crazy idea to go to St. George and just consider that to be the same as Kona. And so Ironman was stuck, and they needed to have 2 races. They couldn't fit it all in one day. And they went to basically the tourism agency in Hawaii and the race director there and leaned heavily on them and said, hey, we need to have 2 races. And they came up with this plan to have a Thursday, Saturday race, which sounds great for fans like us. That's amazing, right? I can watch one day as if I'm on the island and see my friends race and then race myself, or vice versa. Fans get 2 races for one. The problem is for all the people who live on the island and work on the island and who are already struggling to deal with the influx of tourists and what happens when an Ironman comes to your town versus, say, a cruise ship or something else. It was miserable. The locals did not like it. They didn't like the regular race in many cases on the island in terms of the disruption, but 2 races in the same week was too much. And when Ironman went back the next year to say, hey, we want to do that thing again, Hawaii said, in their 30-ish second year, they were like, oh, hey, you like to do that same Saturday in October every year? Sorry, there's a fucking cruise ship coming that week. You can't have it. You can race at the end of the month if you'd like it, which is Hawaii's way of being like, go light yourself on fire and never come back to Ironman. So that was Hawaii's way of just being like, super nice to see you. Yeah, get out of here. And as a result, Ironman is left holding this bag where they're like, oh, we lost our day. We burned all the karma we have, which I'm not sure how you say that in Hawaiian, but I bet it sounds like you burned all your karma, you idiots. And now they've got to find this race on a day they can't have it. And they had to put the race somewhere else. So they came up with this PR related idea that was like, we'll go back to our roots in Nice, where we can have a special event for women. We can finally celebrate them. And the women who are all about 50 in Kona for the last 8 years to get those women there, finally they're getting an event to have it. But it's really because Ironman screwed themselves with their marketing strategy, how they manage events, the fact they didn't want to refund people. And the consolation prize to everyone is now, you get an event that has premier women's racing, which, by the way, not consistent at all with the races that happen. Because just in Placid, they put the pro men 3 minutes later with the pro women and 3 minutes later with the age groupers. So we're right back to the whole, everybody's a big blob racing around the course, which is what they said they were going to fix. And now they're saying it with Nice, but really your day-to-day events are not a reflection of that. So it's not part of your values. You're not doing it consistently. And at the end of the day, people are still waiting to go back to Kona. My last qualification was 2019. I've kicked that can so far down the road. I'm not going until 2014 because I don't want to race in Nice. Nice is not my world championships. It's Hawaii. So anyway, I'm just not sorry. Okay. Rant over. Boop. I'll turn that back.
That was a good one. Man, that was a good one.
Drives me crazy. Drives me crazy. It's hard. When people are on social media and they were like, oh, Andrew Messick's retiring. Like I saw it on, maybe it was on Twitter. Or I can't remember what it was. And like the social media comments were just basically like thumbs down, like bags of money, like whatever. There was no like, thanks for everything message at all. People were just like, you took our sport. And it was not him personally. He's obviously running at the behest of the board, etc. But took our sport, our thing, took away so many of the elements that were popular. The pre-race carbo loading dinner, the post-race after party, all of the elements that made it a community and a vibe. It's all gone. It's just not the same anymore. It's really corporate in a way, which is sad. But anyway. All right. Awesome. Oh my God, we're 33 minutes, brother. DudeGuy flying alone. Can I hit the deferral button on talking about my racing? Because I do. How about next episode we talk about my race in Minneapolis at Lutsen, and then my lessons learned heading into Leadville. Can we do that next time?
Yeah, sounds great. I think that'd be
awesome.
a highly anticipated podcast.
Woohoo! Awesome. I've been doing lots of research with your help and others' help as well. I think it's really interesting to me how, just as a teaser, there's a lot of things that we do as endurance athletes, regardless of your sport. I come from a triathlon background, but that bode well inside a space of Leadville. If you're just new to cycling or new to mountain biking and you don't have a fueling strategy, an altitude strategy, a transition strategy, etc., behind. So many places where I feel advanced in my understanding of what's going to happen, but there's also simultaneously places where I'm like, yikes, no idea what that means. And there's a lot of questions out there, which we're solving with training and a little bit of research as well. So I look forward to sharing those out. But in the meantime, because I am training for Leadville and I'm exhausted and it's lunchtime here, I have to go bust out my food from the fridge and stuff it inside my face before I pass out. All right. In terms of the DudeGuy stuff and everything else that's going on, folks, you can obviously find us on the Endurance Nation podcast. We do this every 2 weeks, although upcoming, we may do it next Friday just because of said travel. And then these two DudeGuys are actually meeting in Colorado. So if you have some ideas for things for us to do when the DudeGuys are together, do you think we should record an episode live and in person, like with actual mountains in the background? That might be fun. And some other things. Maybe they'll come up with a DudeGuy challenge. Who knows what it is? But I'm excited to hear it. Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for showing up to this episode. It was super fun. Great to have you back.
Yeah, good to be back.
All right, here. Fist bumps.
Good to get your fist bump.
Very cool.